I'm sure. Welcome back, everyone, for what I know will be another fascinating session with Reb Irwin on the ritual of resilience, fasting, prayer, and chalk outlines. His titles never cease to amaze me. For those of you who've not met him yet, Rabbi Irwin Keller has served as Sonoma County's congregation near Shalom since 2008. He's a founder and faculty member of the Taproot community, offering Jewish activists a path for deepening in Jewish practice. He's an LGBTQI rights activist and authored Chicago's gay rights law, in force since 1989. He was the founder and for 21 years a performer with the Kinsey Six, America's favorite dragapella beauty shop quartet, who will be coming for a command performance in, I believe, December. And he was also ordained by the Aleph Alliance for Jewish Renewal in the lineage of Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi. And for those of you who haven't had the delight of reading his blogs, I highly recommend them. Reb Irwin, it's always a joy to have an opportunity to hear you teach, no matter what the topic. We are so looking forward to your presentation tonight. You're muted.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you so much. And again, so grateful to be spending Shavuot in community. This is, I think, my favorite ritual of the year is the staying up late and learning together and learning things that we don't get a chance to look at other times. This session is really an invitation to a conversation. There's been some stuff I've been thinking about, and I haven't had really a chance to talk to people about it and see how it feels to other folks. But it comes from some feelings I've been having over time, and I suspect they are not unfamiliar feelings to you, that have to do with a certain kind of helplessness. That things happen in the world, terrible things happen, and we read the news, um, and we feel awful, we feel sad, we might feel deeply affected, and then there's not really a lot to do. There might be some local responses. There's giving money here or there, but there's something missing in the for me in the kinds of responses that are available. And so when some tragedy happens, I feel terrible for a certain amount of time, but I don't have a way to channel that into any kind of collective spiritual practice or any kind of collective spiritual action. And so recently I began thinking about some of our ancient traditions of fasting during times of peril. And I wanted for us to look at some of those texts tonight and to just sort of give some thought and have some conversation, real conversation about what's going on in these texts. What is being achieved by the practices that are proposed there or that are required there? And are there elements either of those practices or of the reasoning behind what we might decide to be the reasoning behind those practices? Is there any applicability for us in this era? What what shared practices, spiritual practices, what theater of spiritual practice could be of use to us? So I'm not going to give a lot more introduction to that. I think let's see what comes up in the conversation, and I'll share more of my ideas as we go along and discuss some of these things. Yeah. So I've put in the chat a link to the document, but I'm happy to do a screen share. I know people, so if you're on a tablet, it's hard to manage more than one document, but it's also there in the chat if you want these texts to look at later. So let me do a little screen share here. Hang on. Okay, are you now seeing the screen? Give a nod, Barbara. Yeah. Okay,
Yep.
great. So the texts that I brought today are from Talmud. I just brought the Mishnah portion, the earliest portion, from Mishnah Ta'anit. Ta'anit is the Hebrew word for a fast, one of the Hebrew words for a fast. And this Mishnah is asking initially questions of what are the circumstances under which we might, as a community, decide to engage in a fast or engage in a fast plus prayer, etc. And do you need any more setup than that? Oh, and so at first, so one thing you need to be aware of for this particular text is that in Jewish tradition, half the year you pray for rain, and half the year you pray for dew. So in a climate like Israel's, which is a climate like we have here in Northern California, you don't pray for rain in July because it's not going to happen. You're praying against the flow of nature, but you do want to pray for rain in the season in which there's a good chance that rain could fall. So from Pesach until Sukkot, we don't pray for rain, and then either at the beginning of Sukkot or at Shmini Atzer at the end of Sukkot, depending on which authority you follow, you switch to the rain prayer. So thinking about the fall for a moment and the way the calendar unfolds, it's Rosh Hashanah, Good Yantiv, Happy New Year. 10 days later, it's Yom Kippur. We atone together. A few days later, Sukkot begins and we're out in the Sukkah. And now we're starting to think about rain. And we're hoping that the rain is going to come and there's going to be enough rain for the crops. And if there isn't, oy vavoy, that is really significant in the ancient world and it's significant now. So, is there someone that would be willing to read this first text for us? I can't see more than three of you. So, if someone would be willing to unmute and just start speaking, it would be great.
If the 17th of Heshvan, 25 days after Sukkot ends, arrives and rain has not fallen, individuals begin to fast 3 fasts for rain. The fast begins in the morning. One may eat and drink after dark. And during the fast, one is permitted to engage in work, bathe, rub oil on one's body, wear shoes, and have sexual relations. If the new moon of Kislev arrives, which is 37 days after Sukkot ends, and rain has still not fallen, the Beit Din declares 3 fasts on the entire community. One may eat and drink after dark, and during the fast, one is permitted to engage in work, bathe, rub oil on one's body, wear shoes, and have sexual relations.
Let's hang on just for 1 second. So, um, Sukkot, right, is when you wanted the rain to begin. So the first paragraph is it's been almost a month, almost a full cycle of the moon, and not a drop of rain has fallen. And then the next level is 12 days after that, rain still hasn't fallen. What's the difference between the first paragraph, what happens after 25 days versus what happens after 37 days? Feel free to unmute, folks, and just speak because I can't call on you.
There's a Beit Din that declares the 3 fasts.
Right.
The second time.
So when it gets more severe, then it's declared. In the first one, it looks voluntary. Individuals begin to fast. So you might decide, I might decide, we might decide to do it, but after 37 days, the court says, okay, everyone, the whole community is fasting. And what's the difference in the nature of those fasts?
It has to be, there's severe fasts. You can eat and drink only while it's still day of the evening before. And on the day of the first fast itself, one is prohibited from work, bathing, rubbing one's body with oil, wearing shoes, and engaging in sexual relations. The bathhouses will be locked so that no one bathes that day.
Oh, right. Okay. So you're ahead of us. So
I'm
would you
sorry.
mind? No, that's great. Why don't you go ahead and read from if these 3 prescribed fasts, the 3 fasts that are declared by the court, the Beit
If
Din.
these 3 prescribed fasts have passed and they have not been answered with rain, the Beit Din declares 3 additional fasts on the community. These are severe fasts. One may eat and drink only while it is still day of the evening before. On the day of the fast itself, one is prohibited from work, bathing, rubbing one's body with oil, wearing shoes, and engaging in sexual relations. The bathhouses will be locked, so no one bathes that day.
Okay, so that's a Yom Kippur kind of fast.
Yeah.
Sundown to sundown, and other austerities as well. Go on, Dorothy.
Okay. If these 3 fasts have passed and they still have not been answered, the Beit Din declares another 7 fasts, making a total of 13 fasts decreed upon the community. These 7 fast days are more severe. In addition to all the earlier stringencies, they sound the alarm and they lock the storehouses. If these fasts have passed and they have not been answered, the Beit Din does not decree additional fasts, but the entire community observes customs of mourning. They decrease their engagement in business, in building and planting, in betrothals and marriages, and in greeting each other like people who have been rebuked by God. Certain individuals, such as the Torah scholars, resume fasting every Monday and Thursday until the month of Nisan ends, at which point one no longer prays for rain.
Okay, thank you.
Ah,
I'm gonna take this off the screen. Did you just make a noise like huh? Like
I meant
ah?
ah, is what it was.
Yeah, what follows the ah?
Why do you no longer pray for rain? Have you just totally given up? Or you're trying to tell God, we still respect you. You're the one that sends the rain. We're not going to pray for it, but if you could possibly give it to us, you know.
Right. Well, this is again back to the question of do you pray for rain when it's not the rainy season?
Yeah.
Um, so and I had this dispute on exactly this topic with an 8-year-old in our school a few years ago when I said, well, now is when we stop praying for rain. And she said, but why? We still need rain. I'm like, well, you don't pray for something that's likely not going to happen. And she was like, no, that's why you have to pray for it because it's not likely going to happen. So that's an alive question overall around do you pray for rain uh, just when rain might come, or do you pray for rain all the time, even if year-round rain might be harmful in your environment? Um, so we just read about these fasts. The first ones being voluntary and not too severe. The next batch being not voluntary. The whole community does it, and it's not too severe. And then the next ones being decreed upon the community, mandatory and pretty severe. And then more customs around engaging in customs of mourning if rain still doesn't come. So here's my question. Why? Why? What is being achieved by doing this? What are all your thoughts on this?
I have a thought. I think these pieces of text were written when most people had an idea of a God who related personally to humans. The God that says, I, the God that says, I did this, now you listen to me. And people talked to God. And I think that there was an assumption that our actions mattered and would have an effect on God, who would then say, oh, I see, you really mean this. Oh, okay.
So a piece of it is trying to force the hand of God.
Hmm.
Um, so what is it about this act of fasting that forces the hand of God?
Well, it's sacrifice. Look, I'm giving up what I like. Oh, now I'm giving up what I need. Oh, now I'm giving up what I need to sustain my life.
Okay, so one possibility is that this is some kind of compensation we're paying for the rain, and this is the only currency we've got is self-affliction in some way. So okay, so that's one possibility. What else does fasting do?
I wanted to say that uh, Rabbi Irwin, since you framed this conversation by using a phrase I thought was intriguing, the theater of spiritual action. And and so I'm thinking that fasting is actually an act of not acting, isn't it? Of not eating, not drinking, not whatever the rest of it, not having sexual relations. So I don't know where that goes, except maybe often action can be seen as not acting.
So it's more than just an omitting to act. It's a purposeful non-acting, right? Is this like a hunger strike? Or as a human, there are all of these life-giving things, and that includes eating, and it includes sexual relations, and includes um, working and developing a livelihood. And is this a refusal? I'm not going to play this. The rain's not coming. I'm not playing.
I want to connect that with what Rabbi George brought from the Rambam of the balance, because it's like something is off balance. The world, something is off in the world, something seriously is off.
And how does the fasting respond to that?
It's a way of maybe helping us as humans to re-achieve a balance or some kind of um, a little bit more introspective, like things stop. You don't, so much of like, there's a lot in fasting. Like, I'm just thinking about my experiences from Yom Kippur. First, there's a lot of work that has to do with making food that you don't need to do when you fast.
There's so much time on Yom Kippur.
Yeah, it's wonderful, right? You don't need to eat. But there is some level of like, and I think it works on the spiritual, but it works by being a social thing. I think the fact that it's a bad din that decrees it so that everyone does it, but also the individuals who do it, maybe other individuals are also deciding to do it. So there's a lot of levels here that could be very effective. And I'm just thinking about how effective Gandhi fasts were, right?
So you're naming a number of elements. There's one piece that is the theater of it, what people see and how people who are not fasting, what they experience when they witness the fasting. There's another piece that's about having the space and the freedom to do some kind of spiritual rebalancing that's personal. There's also some ability, maybe community wide, to do it. I would also just add, like on a practical, on an ASEA level, that's a day's worth of water that doesn't get consumed, right? There's also a protecting of resources.
Not sure, because I don't know if like I tend to drink a lot before and after, you know. It's like almost like I'm not sure how much it really saves.
And like Rabbi George was saying, in this distinction that Maimonides sort of draws between what you need, what is essential, and what is not
Yeah.
essential. There's a great community-wide values clarification that happens when you don't have enough water to grow your food. I just want to bring in a couple of the comments that are happening in the chat. Pam says, and then it leads to mourning. We could be seen as mourning for our earth. So are we, it is the mourning that happens, is it theater? Is it pretend? Or are we actually mourning? And the question is, what are we mourning? Katie says, is there a piece highlighting that something is wrong to make the ecological issue felt at a social, spiritual, and physical level? Lisa and Susan say, fasting as spiritual practice opens you to growth and change. Rabbi Jill says mourning really acknowledges the depth of the situation as a community. Like, what is the way in which this practice of mourning is prophetic? It's a rehearsal for what will happen if the rain doesn't come. Dorothy says, and Dorothy's hand is up also, could be less distraction from the less essential. Dorothy, your hand is up. Say more.
Well, like Maimonides and Rabbi George's, when we're engaged in controlling ourselves and not taking in so many things that are not really essential for ourselves, and focusing on what is really the deep spiritual spot from which we come, we could possibly be more in connection with God and ask from that place.
So the fasting is a preparation for having a different kind of conversation with the divine. The more we fast during this emergency, the more real and direct that conversation becomes. Amy?
Hi, yeah. I was just thinking about what you sort of opened with about when difficult things happen or we're not getting rain, that feeling of helplessness. And a lot of people tend to, give examples of things, actions that you can take. Here's a website to donate to. Here's a letter you can write. And of course, you always do those few little things, but ultimately they still feel like not enough to address the feeling of helplessness, at least for me. And so I definitely was reading this whole thing as like almost as like not selfish, but like a way of not just in an action towards the world, but in an action for yourself of addressing that feeling of helplessness by having a ritual that actually can like bring you into the fullness of what is happening, and feels like an action or a doing that you can do that. And it's such a severe one, right? Like fasting really changes your whole cognitive state. You enter an altered state of being, or at least I do. And that could fill or change that sense of like, there's nothing I can do here. It's something to do that can feel really impactful on a personal level.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. So it might not be that your fasting will change the situation, but there's a way in which sharing a piece of this, sharing some element of suffering,
Exactly.
has some impact, personal, spiritual impact that feels like it's more of a doing than signing a petition.
Yes. And then sometimes once you've like done something or found a ritual or a way of releasing whatever's going on personally, it moves you to a place where you can actually find more agency or action about what's going on. Not always, because some of it is really out of our control, but I find that once I have moved through my feelings in some way, I can get to a different place around it. So
What? I wanna paraphrase that a slightly different way, which is that we often see, or we often, as a culture, talk about sort of spiritual practice as being separate from action in the world. And if you're doing the spiritual practice, then you're not doing the action in the world. And we need to be on the front lines, or we need to be getting out the vote, or we need to be marching, whatever it is we need to be doing. And Amy, you're suggesting, what are the ways in which having a spiritual practice that accompanies us also places us in a better position to be able to do the work of the world that needs to be done? People are lined up to talk. Barbara, then Stephanie, then Rabbi George. Barbara?
I kept on having this sense, as you were talking about the practice of fasting as a way to transform what God has in store for us, as comparable to the act of prostrating ourselves during the high holidays, of actually taking what is inside and making our intention an active part of who we are, and strengthening the connection between heaven and earth by doing so.
Mm. So
I'm not sure where that goes, but
there's something about physicalizing,
yeah,
humbling ourselves, physicalizing, and there's theater to that also. Like this is where there's an outcome ahead if we don't get rain,
yeah,
and we're starting to enact it by
yeah,
fasting. And it's a kind of theatrical self-humbling, but it's not just theater, because this is what's going to happen if rain doesn't come. Stephanie, can you unmute? Oh, okay. Rabbi George?
Very interesting teaching. I'm reminded, it's a little tangential, but I'm reminded of the Talmudic shaman Honi the circle maker. And the story,
That story is in this section.
right. Okay. Because I missed the first part. Did you already read the story?
No, we're not reading it today.
Okay. So, and Melila Helner Eshid, great Zohar scholar, taught me this story. And I'm not sure exactly where this one is located. Maybe it's in this section where a village engages him to pray for rain. And he says, you all need to fast and I'll go do my thing. And he comes back to them and says, the problem is there's not enough rachamim in your village. And if you bring more rachamim, more compassion in the village, the rain will fall. Mm. And only when they have rachamim, compassion for each other, does the rain fall. Mm-hmm. And I love that teaching, especially because rain feels like rachamim. It feels like, womb, like life-giving compassion.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful story about our concept of as below, so above.
Yeah.
Right. As below, so above. That the ita ruta dilatata, as we say in Kabbalistic terms, that if we engage in acts of generosity, then it causes God's divine generosity to come to us. Stephanie, you're back.
Yeah, I just was muted. I'm sorry. So anyway, isn't there an implication that if something like that is happening, that somehow humans are at fault, that they need to be more ethical or something more? There's something we need to do here, like in the whole world right now. There's obviously at least one thing we need to do. And fasting separates you from your material engagement somewhat. Isn't that part of the point? So you're uplifted a little bit and it's a meditative state. So hopefully you might get some messages from God about what we could fix, what we could do, how we could change. Anyway, that was my thought.
Thank you. Yeah, nobody has mentioned that yet about is this penitence? Is it penance? That in the days of our ancestors in a monotheistic culture, if we're suffering, it's because we did something wrong, and this is our atonement for it. And even now, when we might not believe that in that way, depending on what the peril is that we're responding to, if we're responding to global climate catastrophe, there's room for some atonement. There is room for some atonement.
Yeah, I think so.
Leah and Dorothy, and then I actually want to move on because this is a great conversation. Oh, and I want to bring in what Rabbi Jill is saying also. Okay, Leah and then Dorothy.
Someone may have mentioned this, but I don't remember that. When we fast and we can attain a higher, wider framework, we might think of ways to manage the water that we do have that we didn't think of before we had it risen a little bit above ourselves.
Yeah, you get a different vantage point. Dorothy?
In this same discussion, I went over this with Rabbi Peretz earlier in the year. One rabbi, they fasted and they fasted and they fasted, and then he just said, you know what? Go settle your affairs. Go home, make ready to pass away. And then the rain came. Because when people completely accepted the situation, that meant that they were connected to what was really happening. That's my interpretation.
Beautiful. Thank
Another
you.
one was a certain other person, not the one that made the circle, oh no, but somebody else, or maybe it was him, I don't know. He started talking to God. He said, God, we've been together for a while, and I think we need some rain, okay? You know, we have ancestors, we have family in common, let's go. Rain, please, now. And it rained. It rained so much that all the cisterns overflowed and there was mud everywhere and it was brown. So he said, not that much rain. You know, he's talking to him like a regular guy, to God. And it worked. So the rain abated and it was less, just as the man asked. So it depends on how you ask too.
Yeah, that is the same guy. That is Choni, the circle
It is
maker.
funny. I'm sorry. Yeah, I
Um,
didn't know.
it's another piece of that story.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dorothy. I want to bring in Robin reminds us of Ta'anit Esther, of Queen Esther's fast, where she has all the people fast for 3 days while she's preparing. Um, uh, so Robin says, giving her strength to tell the king she's Jewish, not knowing the outcome, right? So she needs some tremendous bravery in order to act in the face of tremendous peril. And she asks the people to fast with her. Rabbi Jill says, it's also magical thinking. Do we really think that our fast will bring the rain? And Max says that is done on a stage, but I'm not certain what that's referring back to. I wanna do I want to look at one of the other of the texts? I do, because I want us to start thinking about how in our day and age these principles might play a role. Often, what we're trying to do in this day and age is not sort of change the heart of not to change a divine judgment, but to change something that has happened in the world around us through human action. So, yes, hooray for magical thinking. Yeah, I think last year I taught something here about magical thinking for Tikkun, Leyl, Shavuot. And the theater of the fast, all of the things that have been raised have been really powerful to me. It feels to me that fasting with other people in the face of a peril could be something very powerful. I also think that as theater, it's also really significant because we're enacting what will happen if change doesn't happen. A lot of you know that I was very involved in AIDS activism in the late 1980s, throughout the 1980s and the early 1990s. And one of the things that ACT UP did at protests, and ACT UP didn't invent it, but they really sort of refined it and used it and got it out into the world, was the use of chalk outlines. And I know that's painful, particularly this week. But ACT UP would do die-ins, and people would lie down. Half the people would lie down, and the other half of the people had chalk. And when that moment was over, there was this rishimu, as we say in Aramaic. There was this lasting impression of loss. This is the heft of the loss that will happen if something doesn't change. And there's something powerful about engaging in community action that so illustrates and embodies what the risk is. So I'm interested also in, what are the kinds of communal uh, communal protest that we do that touches into that brings some of this forward, and what is the spiritual piece of it? Because I'll tell you that while I'm describing this as political theater, lying there while someone chalks in your outline is a heartbreaking experience. It's such and it's a communal experience because everyone else lying there is having that experience as well. Completely heartbreaking experience. So it has an effect, a theatrical effect, but it also is, in some ways, communal spiritual ritual. Oh, lots happening in the chat. Okay, let's bring some of this in. Stephanie says, I seriously believe that a change in consciousness is what is required of us right now, and maybe fasting, certainly prayer, would help. Barbara says, the chalk outlines as part of our Tisha B'Av ritual, remembering our protests at the federal building a few years ago. A few years ago, Ner Shalom we did our Tisha B'Av ritual at the federal building in Santa Rosa. And chanted Echad, chanted lamentations outside the doors. Powerful magic and theater. Anne says yes, in response, I think, to the ACT UP. Rabbi Diane says, in fasting, we empty ourselves literally. We create negative space within ourselves in which we might possibly receive. When we're full up, there's no space in which to receive. The chalk outlines also create negative space. Robin says, thinking of Lysistrata, refusing sex to the fighters of Homer's wars. What is the role of austerities? What would happen? What are the other things we could fast from? If what we're trying to do is something about global warming and fossil fuels, what would happen if we created oh, wow, all the Salives are here. That's so exciting. Mazel tov, you three. What would happen if communities started doing a monthly fast, one-day fast from driving? What would that feel like? What would fill that negative space? We learned a little bit about that during the early days of the pandemic when so many people were staying home, and we learned suddenly how big home was because there was time. It was spacious in time. Gosh, let's do just one more text, and you can look at the other ones on your own time. I'd like to just do. Oh, so there are also special prayers. That wasn't just fasting. There were 6 prayers added to the daily Amidah that were specifically prayers that they were all texts taken from Tanakh where someone is saved from peril, and then there was a Chatima, a Baruch Atah at the end of it that you can see. I've put them here. Blessed are you, Adonai, who remembers the forgotten. Blessed are you, Adonai, who hears the shofar blast. Blessed are you, who hears our cries, who hears prayer, who answers in a time of trouble. All of these are almost magical formulas. I mean, the difference between a prayer, a piece of liturgy, and a magical formula is it's a pretty thin distinction. We're still naming God, and we're still hoping that this thing will come to pass through the ways we speak to God and through the particular language we use for God. God as the hearer of our troubles, as the witness of our cries. But so the piece that we read initially was what happens when the rain doesn't come when it's supposed to come. If the rain starts and then stops, then a fast is called immediately. You don't have the intermediate steps. Also, if there are other kinds of perils, if there's a plague, if there's a pestilence, if there's an army coming, the fast gets called immediately. Um, this is the piece I just want to look at from the third chapter of Ta'anit. I'll just read it to you. If a city is afflicted by pestilence or collapsing buildings, that city fasts and cries out. So the crying out is probably shofar blowing, blasts of the shofar. And the surrounding areas fast, but they do not cry out. Rabbi Akiva, however, says, well, no, they cry out, but they do not fast. And that happens a couple of times. But that's the piece I wanted you to see, that there is a distinction between the practice of the community that is personally affected by the peril and the community that is either concerned they'll be next, that the locusts are next, they're downwind and that's where the locusts are coming, or that they're standing in solidarity. So there's something here, I think, for us about how we respond ritually, spiritually, to the things that are affecting us, and how we respond when we are responding in allyhood, in solidarity. And that interests me because I think there is something to be done with fasting or something like it in response to, last week after Uvalde, if we had declared a fast day in solidarity, I would have fasted and I would have felt a powerful solidarity with everyone else who was fasting. What might be the uses of any of these spiritual, physical, psycho-spiritual technologies in the perils that we are facing now? So that's the question. What's coming up for you? And a special invitation to people who haven't gotten a chance to speak their thoughts into the room yet. Is there any applicability of any of this stuff for us? Rinat?
I'm thinking about the declaring and maybe the role of a rabbi in making that declaration for the community. And I'm thinking that it's not too late.
Oh,
So
that it's not too late regarding Uvalde?
regarding Uvalde, definitely. And also regarding, the climate catastrophe, there's a lot of reasons, right? So yeah, just a little nudge.
Yeah, this isn't a theoretical conversation. Like we
Yeah,
could do
that's
this
what
next
I'm
week.
saying. Yeah, a little nudge.
We could do this next week.
Yes.
Neshama?
I'm really liking what you're saying. I like this idea. Anyone can fast unless they have a medical reason not to. It's not like you have to drive somewhere and protest. It's not like you have to write a check. Anyone can fast, and you can modify the fast. You can participate. I love this idea, Reb Irwin.
Thank you.
It's,
Susan? Oh, I'm sorry, Neshama, go on.
it's immediate action, immediate.
And there's something about the communalness of it. I mean, I'm trying to imagine what it would be like if I just decided, okay, I'm fasting, and I don't talk about it with anybody else. Versus if I know that the Jewish community of Sonoma County or the interfaith community of Sonoma County is going to declare, the declaring again, is going to declare a fast, and those who are able to, or everybody fasts in some way. What would that feel like for us? But then also, how do we take what that feels like and translate it into something? Or is translation into action necessary? Or is the world, say, people witnessing the fasting of people of faith, is that the point? before I call on Susan, I just want to say Rabbi George says, I too like the idea of calling a communal fast. At a minimum, it would give us some sense of agency in a world where we often have very little. I also share Rabbi Jill's concerns about magical thinking. Um, well, I'm not certain that Rabbi Jill was actually saying that as a critique of it, but yes, right. So that question is, what does it do for us? And what does it do for the problem that we're addressing? And Jan says, I feel it's important to feel that we are not alone. Susan, and then Stephanie again.
It's actually Rachel, but I'm here with Susan.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. I just came on in the last 5 minutes, but I have been actually thinking about something very similar, because I felt after Uvalde, I just felt like I just wanted to have a general strike. Like I just wanted everyone to just stop what they were doing. It felt like we needed to stop, not necessarily to do more, because it wasn't clear what there was to do, but it felt like I felt this like compelling physical need to just have everybody around me stop what they were doing for some amount of time. And it was almost like exactly what you're saying, whether it was fasting from food, fasting from work, fasting from media, fasting from buying things, it felt like I just felt this strong urge to just say, hey, we all need to stop. And so I think also for climate change, the same kind of thing, the idea of this communal action that may actually be inaction feels almost more powerful than distracting ourselves by trying to do lots of things.
There was a group, an ad hoc AIDS activism group that preceded ACT UP in San Francisco called No Business as Usual. And they were the ones who, some of you will remember, I think it was late 89 or the beginning of 1989 or late 88. They were the ones that blocked the Golden Gate Bridge, right? So everyone hated them because no one could get to work from Marin County. But they were responding. Hang on a second.
Annie.
I'm muting you there. They were responding to that same sense of there's something wrong and terrible going on, and we can't just go about doing what we would normally do. Like we need to stop and pay attention. Anne says, oh, let me just read these in. Oh, wow. Okay. We can leave a couple minutes. Leah says, like the minute of silence, it's the not doing, the not speaking that can be so powerful. That's responding to Rachel. Robin says, for those like me who can't medically fast, Rabbi Elisheva used to say that we could eat very lightly, tiny bites one at a time with a consciousness of why. So yeah, the traditional non-eating fast doesn't have to be the only way we fast. Alyssa says, so maybe what's important about this is not the fasting as much as the community coming together somehow in action. Anne says, if it is communal and publicized, it is an eloquent statement of the pain and helplessness we all feel. If we had a magic wand that would end it, we would have done this. When we as individuals feel helpless, this kind of theater can have effect. So, right, yeah, thank you, Anne. Stephanie, last word.
Oh, wow. What an honor.
Sure.
Well, I think it would do all those things that everybody has mentioned potentially, and that we should add that the very act of fasting and stopping could produce something in our own awareness that we didn't know was there that would lead to something after that. That just the very act of stopping opens the field for something different to happen.
Right. A little bit like what Rabbi Diane was saying about the opening up the negative space allows something new. As long as we're doing, fast responding, then there isn't room for new insight.
Right.
I'm putting my email address here in the chat. Let me read in what Sandra and Brandy and Lilia say. Coming from a fat justice perspective, while I like the theatrical piece, I think we need to recognize that fat Jews are often told to restrict food, and we need to consider the impact of that perspective. Right. Declaring a fast, that was Sandra, thank you. Declaring a fast is not a neutral choice, right? So it might hit people in different ways. And so it might be that what we need to do is not a fast, but something else, or an invitation to some kind of action, and let people choose what the action is that's right for them, and then have a forum where they can share what they're doing, share the ideas. Tom and Sarah Lee say, acknowledging that in some areas we are powerless may be difficult. It may be necessary, and at the same time, it may open another area where we do have power. This is exciting. I put my email in the chat, a couple of rows up, a couple of comments up, because I would like to do something with this. And people have so many thoughts about it, and it means coming up with the ideas and who would be involved and how do you decree it and who decides to decree, and is it small communities, large communities, and what is it that we're asking people to do, and are we doing it for everything? There's so much pain and so much danger. How do we know when is the right moment to do it? If we think it only can have effect if it's limited, then how do we decide? Or if we think that, like the Ta'anit, you keep having more fasts and they get more severe, then what ideas do we come up with about that? So thank you all for this really, really rich conversation. We will end this session. I'll stay here if people want to say some more things, but an invitation to get up and move around, because we have 2 more sessions. We have a beautiful session coming up with Yael Raff-Peskin reporting back about her experiences spending the last month, a couple months at the Ukrainian border, and you don't want to miss that. And then we're going to ease ourselves into and integrate what we've experienced tonight with meditation with Rabbi George. So thank you for being part of this. I'm going to shut off the recording, and we'll meet back in 8 minutes.
I'm going to add one more thing, and that is, I know that people may be drifting off as we get toward the end, and I want to add one announcement, and that is, at Ner Shalom tomorrow, we have a small in-person outdoor event. It is our Shavuot Tish. It's the first time we've done it. I felt there was a need for cheesecake, and everybody else seemed to have decided that I might have had a good idea. And it will be an afternoon starting at 4 of poetry of our people, specifically around the theme of Shavuot. I'll be looking at a poem by Marge Piercy about the book of Ruth and Naomi. And then Reb Irwin will be teaching something which is a totally obscured because it's been typed over, but a prayer poem for Shavuot, weighing in at 90 lines. And we'd love you to join us. You can go to the Ner Shalom website and look at the calendar for tomorrow and sign up so we know you're coming, so we make sure we have enough cheesecakes. I think there are only 3 that I'm aware of, but there are fewer people than will be needed to eat that. So if you're wanting some more tastes of this and you want a little in-person stuff, please feel that you're included. If you're not in the far-flung universe, I know one of our participants tonight was coming from London. That might be too far to schlep, but if you're close by, we'd love to continue this even beyond tonight's meditation at midnight.
What if it's raining?
We'll still be eating cheesecake.